Hey guys, Pat here. Welcome to the Beef Stew Podcast, Episode 5. Wait, hold on, I'm getting a phone call. Hello?
Pat, it's Orson Welles. I think it's time we talked.
It's just evil.
Is that why?
He's just an evil Orson Welles. Okay, so here's the thing. Blood Money and I, who haven't done another Beef Stew since the Dune trailer reaction, which was like 2 months ago, he watched Mank, I watched Mank. Neither one of us know what the other one thought of it. We haven't discussed the movie at all. So we're going to go over some topics here and break it down. There's been a lot of controversy over this movie, over its Netflix release, comments that David Fincher has made, and of course the historical accuracy built around the movie. So, one time watching Anthony Bourdain's cooking show, I remember him saying that the only people who know brisket are Jews and people from Texas. Well, I am a person from Texas, and Blood Money is Jewish, so we are qualified to talk about the beef. What were your thoughts?
True.
What were your thoughts on Mank? Let's throw that out there. General thoughts. You start, and then I'll go. What's your review of the movie? Now, this just is a general thoughts, general opinions, like a summary of what you
General
felt about the
thoughts?
movie. Yeah,
I
you don't have to go into detail.
It's a passion project. No, he brings back a lot of his visual flair. Old Fincher doing his daddy's project, getting it out of the way. He's not doing another season of Mindhunter. I prefer this to another season of Mindhunter, honestly. It was nice to kind of have him open up like he did with the game. In my opinion, the movie kind of has to be, or this is how I enjoyed it. It doesn't have to be enjoyed this way. I felt that it was a speculative fiction film, kind of like like The Man in the High Castle, that Philip K. Dick novel, where the Nazis and Japanese win World War II. It's kind of like that as far as historical accuracy. And that's when I was watching, I thought, okay, that's kind of what this is. And I thought it would be like, it would end with him directing it, kind of like, you know, Inglorious Bastards, they kill Hitler, and Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, they prevent the Manson murder. And I thought it would end with Orson Welles turning into literally Satan, and being defeated by Max von Sydow, priest's outfit. Yeah, but in general, I like the movie. I enjoyed it a lot. I don't think it really was about Citizen Kane. I thought it looked fantastic. It was great watching it. Just put it on a big TV and skip through it. It's wonderful.
I'm pretty similar to
What about
you.
you?
I was scared because at first the reviews came out a little while ago and they were at first like raves. Like everybody was saying it was a masterpiece and it was going to win all these Oscars and it was Fincher's best film in years. I kept reading a lot of like best since Zodiac type stuff. And then the
It's
reviews
no Zodiac.
turned the other direction where people started saying that it was like one of his worst films and that it was emotionally distant and that it wasn't for casuals. And then I started to get really scared. I started to get Roma vibes. I was like, oh shit, is this another Roma where like it's a critical darling black and white movie by an acclaimed director and then I watch it and it's boring as shit? I generally went in with that fear. Like this is going to be another Roma and I didn't want to feel that way, but it's happened to me recently. I find this weird thing with Netflix where they ruin things that I like, and I don't know how they keep doing this. Like Black Mirror was a show I loved until it became a Netflix show. I liked Comedians in Cars Getting Coffee until it went to Netflix, and then it got worse. Fincher stuff on Netflix hasn't been what I want Fincher to be doing. Um, he hasn't made a movie in 6 years. That's the longest break he's ever taken. But I'll say this: the first 20 minutes, I wasn't super into it. I was like, this is okay, but I don't. I was respecting that he was making it feel like a film from the 40s, and it was edited and put together, and even the delivery of the lines was sort of like an older movie, which I really liked because I think a lot of people try to do that and fail at it. And I think he was doing it really well. But I'll say this: about a half hour into the movie, I think it became hypnotically entertaining, if that makes sense. It was like the atmosphere of it starts to sort of take over, and you get engulfed in it, and you have to kind of go with it because it is a very odd film in the way it's structured and put together. It's not conventional in a lot of ways. It's actually one of Fincher's more conventional films from a storytelling standpoint. I'm actually surprised that how cliche some of the stuff is for him. Like, this reminded me more of like, well, we'll get into that when we rank it in Fincher's filmography. But I like the film. I think it's very entertaining. I particularly think the middle stretch of the film is very entertaining, the middle hour of the film. And I'll say this that really shocked me because I'm not a fan of her. I thought Amanda Seyfried was like amazing in this movie, and the way that she was shot was really interesting to me, and I like how she looked. I thought it was very intelligent the way that they did that, and I think any scene with her and Gary Oldman, or anything with him and Charles Dance, I think is really, really good, and I wish there was more of it in this movie. And then I became a little bit more mixed on it with the last 20 minutes. The last 20 minutes kind of, we'll get into it later, but I don't know exactly how I feel about it. But I like the movie quite a bit. I thought it was very entertaining. I don't think it's like top tier Fincher. I think it's mid tier Fincher. I don't think this is his worst movie. I don't think it's Benjamin Button. But I also don't think that this is one of the great David Fincher movies. But I can't. A lot of people are giving this movie flack. It's getting a lot of negative attention now, and I don't get why. Because I actually, and I agree with you. I think it's very. I think for the movies trying to copy the black and white thing in digital, I think this is the best I've ever seen it done in digital.
I'd have to agree with you. Any that come to my mind, at least. And yeah, it's not Zodiac, it's not Social Network, it's not The Game, but I would say it's up there, in my opinion. It's really not a film about Citizen Kane. It's very clearly about a man aging. It's about being in your 60s and looking back at what it was like being 20 and kind of hating that 20-year-old,
Yeah.
that Wunderkind.
Hmm. Well, what got me was that was the shocking because I thought it was going to be a movie about the making of Citizen Kane on some level, and it's not really that at all. It's much more
No,
a movie about it's got more of a political bent to it than I was expecting. It's a very political film in stretches. Um, what I thought was what I thought it was saying ultimately is I thought Fincher was taking a side of the writer over the auteur. I think this was a criticism or maybe a look at the filmmaking auteur genius that does everything versus the screenwriter. And I think that it was very particular that he gave his father credit to this because Eric Roth and Fincher both did revisions of the screenplay uncredited, but they kept the sole credit to Jack Fincher, his father. But Fincher rewrote on this because he felt like the original script was too harsh on Orson Welles. But I think this felt like to me a love letter to not only his father, which I think there's a lot of his father in the Mankiewicz of this movie. I think it's a love letter to the behind the scenes writers of movies that aren't the acclaimed or the people at the front of center in the same way that a filmmaker is. I think that's a lot of what this movie was about. Or at least that's how I interpreted it from one viewing, was that he was trying to appreciate the writer in Hollywood, where maybe the writer, or maybe that there was even a time where there were these great writers that were mammoths and they don't really exist so much anymore in the Hollywood we live in today.
yeah, and that's what it is. It's that the famous Algonquin Round Table, right? And these writers who came out of the very literary New York and ended up writing the dialogue-heavy Howard Hawks films, and before that, in the big Paramount era, you have all of these wonderful writers coming together. Yeah, S.J. Perlman, George Kaufman, and Hecht. They're all there together. I've never been able to pronounce his name correctly. I think Charles Lederer, um,
Mm.
who wrote uh, Front Page. He worked on that, and they're all making what would become the American comedy. Um, and they moved American comedy away from silence. You have Charlie Chaplin and especially Buster Keaton, Earl Lloyd, into these very heavy screwball comedies. They're dialogue heavy. And as far as what the movie's about, I've watched it about 4 or 5 times now. I like certain scenes. I like going back and watching through the movie. Um, and not even just for the review. I've just enjoyed going through the movie.
It is a background movie. When I watched it, I like you said earlier, you said that you can have it on your TV because I have a 50-inch television in my living room, and I just kind of had it on casually, and it wasn't like I was sitting there intensely watching it like I would with some other movies. I was sort of casually watching it, but it was enjoyable in that way. I don't really know how this would have played in the theater. I'm curious, but it was interesting in the year of COVID without like a lot of movies being out and stuff like that to watch this movie at home. It
I
was a
didn't know there was any controversy about it, but it was meant for streaming. I
yes.
don't think this would have played very well in a theater.
I think it's one of his smaller movies in a lot of ways. I was surprised at how I don't want to say slight because that sounds like a pejorative. I don't mean slight as in like it was a slight film that it didn't have a lot going on. It was a it's actually a pretty small, like it's not really an epic. There was part of me that thought like should this have been a 3-hour movie? Cuz I would have liked more. I would have liked more stuff about not necessarily Citizen Kane, but all the stuff with him going back and forth between the studios and the producers and the election going on. I really liked that stuff, and I just would have liked more of it because outside of Mank, I don't feel like a lot of the other characters get much development in this movie. They're sort of window dressing. And I like all the supporting characters, and I think I would have liked because it's one of those movies you sort of get lost in, you sort of experience it as a film, and I think it could have been a 3-hour movie or three. And it's crazy to say, but I really do think this could have been, like how Schindler's List, the length of it. I think this could have been like a 3-hour and 10-minute movie, and I think I could have watched it because I think it's a movie you can watch in pieces instead of it being a 2-hour and like 10-minute movie. Because I thought it was surprisingly, the thing that shocked me the most is how fast the pacing was in this movie. I thought it would be a lot slower just because of the kind of movie it was, but it's actually got like, it moves pretty quickly, faster than I was expecting it to. Like, that shocked me the most is that, like, once the movie gets going, it kind of keeps going. That it has a lot of momentum. And it kind of went by pretty quick for me once I got, like, pretty much the second half
Yeah,
of the movie I thought went very quickly. And I think
it's engaging.
I could have watched more. I'll say that. Like if
I
there was deleted scenes, I would have watched them.
Yeah, I would have watched more too, but after watching it a few times, I have to say I don't think there could be that much more. If a better writer had really tackled it, you know, I think there could have been. But everyone shows up, says their quote or two from fucking Bartlett's, you know.
Yeah.
They say their quippy one liner. I'm surprised Dorothy Parker didn't show up. He's certainly not worried about too many fucking characters. But they all show up, say their famous witty phrase, and then exit stage,
Well,
sued by Bear.
well, that was the thing that shocked me the most. One thing that I'll give credit to Jack Fincher too is the dialogue was really good. Like really, really good. Like in particular, the
But
stuff
they
that
aren't real characters, you
no,
know. They aren't real characters. They're there to serve the plot. They're there to serve
I
Mank.
just mean like the one-liners. Like Gary Oldman's one-liners in this movie were way better than I thought they were gonna be.
Half of them are just things that Mankiewicz really said,
Yeah, it
just
works.
piled
It's really
together.
good. It's just really good. It's like really entertaining. I just wasn't expecting it to be like this, to have these confrontation, like ripping on each other battle sort of moments in it, and that's what was like part of the fun of the movie was guys throwing shade at each other, and he always has the best comeback, as writers typically do. And that was really fun. You know, it was always kind of a thing where he was the smartest person in the room, sort of thing. And it's always fun to
Yeah,
watch
I
movies
mean,
like that.
yeah, Joseph Mankiewicz was a very clever man. Herman Mankiewicz was a very, very clever man. And I don't think of him really as a writer as much as I do quipper. You know, people loved having him in the room. That's what he's really remembered for.
That's even brought up in the movie. He doesn't like your writing. He likes the way that you talk.
And that's pretty accurate from how everyone talks about him. He was
Yeah.
just really, really quick.
So let's move on to our next topic here because we have a lot to cover. But I guess generally what you could say is that we both like the movie with maybe some minor reservation. I like the point you made that if a better writer would have written this, it could have been more, because I agree with that. I feel like I like the idea of this movie on paper more than necessarily the movie we got. I like the movie that we got, but I actually think there's a better movie to be made about just this topic, a movie about old Hollywood.
Yeah, I don't really like the idea of the movie. I think there's a lot of ways to misshoot Herman Mankiewicz.
I,
You know, he had a
I'll
lot of
say
very differing
I'll
opinions.
say this. I like the idea of David Fincher making a movie about a behind the scenes look at
You can just leave it
Hollywood.
there. I like the idea of David Fincher
Yeah,
making a
I
movie.
like the idea of David Fincher making a movie about old Hollywood. I'll say that. I like that idea. Because this still had that David Fincher thing about it where, like, he just, even when his story that he's telling isn't, like, one of the best, his filmmaking prowess, the way that he blocks and composes and puts scenes together, it's, at this point, he's just better than everyone else in America. I mean, I feel like he's just kind of left Paul Thomas Anderson and all these other guys behind. I still think Tarantino does interesting stuff, but I mean, it honestly felt like this was effortless, like this wasn't hard for him, and I'm sure that's not true. But watching this, it was sort of like, God, has he just mastered this that it's this easy for him to make a fucking movie like this now? You know, it just
Yeah,
felt.
it's so, you know, you watch how he moves from zone to zone and how he punctuates a key scene, and it's almost like a joke. He's going to punctuate it with the longest crossfade you've ever seen.
Yeah, I just don't know how his subtlety. Like, there's a sequence in this movie where somebody commits suicide, and instead of over dramatizing it, you just see a shot outside of a window, and it's just perfect. It's restrained. It's the way to do it. There's a lot of movement in that scene from a dialogue scene with these bullets, and then you get and it's really like predictable. It's not really that clever, but he directs it so cleverly that it makes it better than what it is. And that's really what Fincher is like so good at. He could take anything and just find the right way to do it, where another
I know.
director would fuck it up and it would be a bad scene. It would be a scene that you're like, this is really bad stuff. And like Panic Room's a perfect example of that, where that's the most cliche screenplay ever written by David Koepp. But he directs it so masterfully that stuff that shouldn't
Panic
be.
Room is a goddamn masterclass
I
in
know,
filmmaking.
because it shouldn't be as clever as it is, but he directs it because then it becomes like, oh, this technology that she's relying on in this panic room is not only protecting her, it's also the prison. And him making it the way he does with the more digital technology and the CGI illuminates this almost like digital prison that she's lived in, and then him, the filmmaker, is almost the one holding them prisoner. And he's one of those directors like a Hitchcock or a Kubrick or an Orson Welles, where he's in such control of what he's doing that he's the god of it so much that you can try to criticize and penetrate David Fincher, but you ultimately know the decisions he's making are just so intelligent that it's really hard to it's hard to criticize him as a director. You can criticize his movies because of things that are wrong with them, but it's really hard to criticize what he does in it. Like, I think Benjamin Button's on the borderline of being a pretty bad movie, but it's so beautifully shot and made and put together. Like, okay, so where would you
The
rank
stuff is
this?
lit so fucking well.
I know he's just so, that's the thing, because he's cinematographer on this. We'll get to that later, but it's a new
Composition.
Yeah, just
I mean,
composition and camera movement, just movement and cutting on movement. He's like so fucking good at it. Where would you rank this in Fincher's filmography? I feel like this is more Girl with the Dragon Tattoo tier Fincher, where it's a little bit cold and detached and almost too calculated to really reach that like Seven, Fight Club, Social Network, Zodiac level. Because I think those
yeah,
movies,
I agree.
I think those movies you love the character so much with his great
Though I would put The
filmmaking.
Game up there with
Yeah,
those
The
movies.
Game. Yeah, his great movie. Even Gone Girl. Stuff in Gone Girl is very
I'd put this around Gone Girl.
but I feel like this is more Dragon Tattoo or Gone Girl Fincher. I don't think it's like the classics. Like I'm not gonna go back to this the way I do Seven or Fight Club, but I still think it's really good. I don't think it's like Panic Room, Benjamin Button tier David Fincher. What?
I think higher of Panic Room than you do, I think.
I
Um,
really like Panic Room a lot. I think Panic Room's like really entertaining, but I always just fight the fact that it's like I don't like that it ends with that happy ending. I think that goes against what Fincher is as a filmmaker, and I have
I mean,
issues
who
with it.
gives a shit? Watch it on mute.
Well,
I mean,
because
the sound is great, but I mean,
Well, because what makes him good is that his films are unconventional within genres. Like Seven has one of the darkest endings
that's
for
not what
any
makes it
Hollywood
good.
thriller, and Fight Club has a very unconventional. And he instead of setting up conventions you think are going, Fincher always does something more interesting than you expect another movie to do. And with a movie like Panic Room, it goes exactly the way you expect it to go. It's perfectly executed, but I don't know. When I say that I don't think it's like top tier Fincher, it doesn't mean that I don't think it's good. It's just he's made like masterpieces. He's made
Yeah, I
some of the
mean, the
best
script.
films of the last 20 years.
I agree. As far as American films go, that's definitely true. But to me, I don't think that's what makes his films great. I think it's the perfect construction. It's like he's building a goddamn Aston Martin, you know, some sort of
Mm,
perfect little puzzle,
right.
like a little wooden Chinese puzzle box. And he's just carving out every little nook and cranny perfectly. I get this like Japanese propaganda TV um, from like digital antenna TV.
Hmm.
Like I have like one channel, and it's this Japanese NHK propaganda TV, and almost every special is about this craftsman doing one weird thing after another, and some weird craftsman like Japanese hobby. I think there was a great segment on this art where they make this perfect piece of pottery, then they just fucking smash it and put it back together using this gold paste. And the way they just take their time and meticulously, perfectly make it. That's what Fincher does.
Yeah,
I think that's really what makes his films
but what I
great.
would argue against that is I think that on the surface level is what makes Fincher great, and I think all of his movies are great. But I think on a thematic and emotional level, because then I think sometimes he's cold. Like this is the Christopher Nolan issue. Was like when Christopher Nolan like either he gets it or he doesn't. I think Fincher kind of falls in that sometimes where like, and I feel it a little bit of this movie where, his movies are always sort of about his characters are obsessed people. That's why Zodiac's such a great movie because all of the characters are obsessed with this one thing and we're following them over years dealing with this obsession. So ultimately, the killer doesn't matter. It's how these people are dealing with it. And I think psychologically that's what makes this film interesting. Like Hitchcock make technically perfect films, but there's a reason that like we hold Psycho or uh, Vertigo and certain other films because
Shadow of a Doubt.
there's a psychological aspect that puts it above the technical
Got a
perfection.
better script,
Yeah,
you know.
exactly. And I just don't think this is one of the great scripts David Fincher's worked with. Is all I'm saying. I think
Fucking A, it's not.
I think this is definitely one of the weak. Like, I don't think this is the script to Seven or The Social Network. You know, I don't think this is an Aaron Sorkin screenplay. I don't think Jack Fincher is going to win an Oscar for this. And I don't really know if this. I don't even. Why am I? There's no way this would have been made into a movie, that screenplay, of David Fincher, if it wasn't his father and Netflix, because he was going to make this after the game. This was his next movie after the game, and no studio wanted to make it because he wanted to film it in black and white. So he sat on this movie for about 20 years, and he just now was able to get it made because of Netflix, which I think. I wish maybe he would have brought someone in to punch up the script besides Eric Roth, the guy who wrote Forrest Gump and fuck
Yeah,
what and
it's funny hearing those two talk about how much they fucking hate each other.
yeah, Forrest Gump, Benjamin Button,
Eric Roth and David
and
Fincher. Talk about,
one of your most hated, Munich, the guy who wrote Munich.
I
Uh,
know, yeah.
so I kind of wish you'd have brought somebody in a little bit like. I mean, I don't know. You couldn't get a Steve Zalian to come in or something like that. You know what I mean?
Oh
Like,
no, you bring in Eric Roth because you don't want him to change anything. It's maybe an idea or two, or the wording of something.
okay, so let's move on to historical accuracy. Now, you would know more
Oh,
about this than I would. How historically accurate is this film? I would say that for the most part, I would go like on a, for my knowledge, it's a 60-40. I think a lot of this stuff is fantasy and
science fiction.
yeah, and not reality on any. I in particular, the Orson Welles stuff, I think is off. Um,
That's just bullshit.
yeah,
But
that's
a lot of it is science fiction,
the Orson Welles
except
stuff upset me the most
without the
with this
science.
movie by
It
far.
didn't upset me because as soon as I was watching it, I thought, all right, this is speculative history. I was never upset with it. You have this Orson Welles dressed up in his black
Yeah.
magician outfit, as I like to call it. From he wears it in F for fake, and he's this Mephistophelian character, right?
Yeah, he's in the shadows. Always. He's always. Did you like the guy who played Orson Welles? I thought the voice was good. I don't know if he necessarily looked.
He looked enough like him. I mean, the voice. I like how they did it. Do you know
It
how they did it? It
no,
was
it wasn't bad. I really liked like he sound. I mean, it sounded like Orson
he had
Welles.
he had Maurice LaMarche record all the lines on tape, and Fincher did, and he gave it to the actor, and he said, "Just do it exactly like this," which I think is a great idea
I thought
because you
it.
don't just have the same
Yeah,
Maurice LaMarche voice. You just have that. He's for anyone who doesn't know, he who is the voice of Brain and Pinky and the
yeah.
Brain,
He's doing an
and
Orson Welles
because
impression and
he's the
peeking. Yeah,
foremost Orson Welles impersonator.
yeah. No, Brain is just Orson Welles.
God, this is some horrible sherry.
Yeah. Sorry, Niles. We're in
Oh, my God.
Fraser's $5 million condo here in Seattle.
Yeah, it's horrible sherry.
But I don't know. I'll say this. I felt like he was pretty good when he was like in the chair on the phone. I didn't like his acting in the third act. I don't think that guy's that great of an actor. I think when he actually showed up at the house at the end, I don't think he nailed that scene for me. The
I
part
mean,
where he throws the shit and he's talking to him. I don't think that scene was as great as it, because the movie builds up to that fucking scene. And it's parallel
yeah,
between him and Hearst, Charles Dance, and they're doing this. There's a comparison being made with the way that it's cut together, and he's even in like the Kane house and the way it's shot, and him and Gary Oldman are going through. I thought that final dinner table sequence was very good and fascinating. I don't know if the final Orson Welles Mank confrontation. I don't think that totally worked. I think
no,
that
it's
was.
not. It's a fantastic punchline. You've been set up with the Hearst moment, which is one of the finest moments we've had from Charles Dance
I agree.
in the past 20 years.
Doing so much without talking. It's an eye performance in so many ways. He does so
I
much with
mean,
the
it's funny.
look.
He gives a goddamn Orson Welles Harry Lime speech.
Mm-hmm.
One of the best moments of the movie. He gives the old
I agree.
parable of the monkey grinder. And everyone knows how it goes, right? But hearing him do it,
No, it's
watching Gary Oldman
Yeah.
act his ass off. And by act his ass off, I don't mean he's giving a great performance. I mean he's hamming it up.
Yeah.
Like this is like he's converting to Judaism tomorrow. This is the last time he'll ever have pork in his life. He's got to ham it up so much.
Doesn't it always feel like Gary Oldman knows something that we don't as an
No,
actor?
it doesn't.
I always feel
It
like,
feels like Gary Oldman is smoking something I don't have.
yeah, it feels like Gary Oldman has, because anyone who has a talent or a skill they've developed, they have secret tricks that they don't teach everybody, and this is true for all
I don't think he
sorts.
needs tricks. I don't think he needs tricks at all.
I think he's
I
just
think
learned
he
things.
shows up and he's that good.
I agree, but I think there's some secret. I think there's some secret actory stuff that he knows that that only really,
Some
really, really good actors know because.
eyes wide shut stuff.
Yeah, I think exactly. I think because this is just something that happens with craft. I mean, you develop things. I think because there's things he's doing in this movie that like because there's a lot of ham to this movie, and if
Oh
Fincher
yeah.
wasn't directing it, and you didn't have Gary Oldman doing it. I mean, some of this stuff could have been like comedic in a bad way. Like
Let's just say this.
this could have
This
been a
movie's a BLT,
yeah.
and thank God the bacon is there.
Well,
And it's high quality bacon. It's that thick cut deli peppered bacon. Not that shitty, bar S cut bacon.
let me ask you with historical
Shriveled up into
accuracy.
nothing.
What did they get right? Is there something in particular that was done that was exactly on point? Besides, let's say, like,
Exactly on point.
besides costumes and stuff like that, was there anything storytelling wise that was pretty accurate? Like, what do you think was the most accurate thing in the movie?
Well, just because I've never seen it in a movie before, it was great to see the Epic campaign, which was Upton Sinclair's campaign. Although, really, Herman Mankiewicz had nothing to do with that campaign at all. His brother even helped with the propaganda films. Herman Mankiewicz was pretty conservative as things go, and Upton Sinclair is a fascinating, horrible writer. I'm convinced Herman Mankiewicz would have hated Upton Sinclair if there was ever anything he said about him. I'm convinced he would have hated Upton Sinclair just by his prose alone. Um, Upton Sinclair also was anti-Semite. I mean, the guy made a perfect utopian community that was whites only, no Jews. So you wonder why all these Jews in Hollywood hate him, right?
Yeah, I didn't really buy that either. I thought that was odd that Mankiewicz was such a
Upton Sinclair, yeah, is not this paragon of humanity. He was a real piece of shit, in my
yeah,
opinion.
I thought that was weird
And
too. Like they portray him in the movie as like this like hero s character that was like that makes it was very odd.
it feels, I mean, there's a lot of things in the movie that feel very Jack Fincher. Like this is
Yes.
something an old guy would have written in the early '90s when he didn't have access to the computer or access to a bunch of Upton Sinclair books. Just a little few facts.
Okay, so I'm gonna move on here
I mean,
to
Upton Sinclair, they should have really brought up the fact Upton Sinclair wrote a whole book about how his wife can speak to the dead and
right. That's what I'm
and
saying. That's what I'm saying with this
and
being like a
I want
3-hour
more.
movie, man.
I want Bill Nye the Science Guy to explain how his wife can communicate using Professor X powers.
Dude, I'm with you. That's the thing when I'm saying when I like this being like a 3-hour movie. Like I wanted that stuff in this movie. Like I like the movie that we got, but there's that movie that is more that does explore those things. Because you said like you've never seen it in a movie before. I want that shit in a movie directed by David Fincher. Because that stuff's fascinating.
What's historically accurate? Most of the people were there at the right time. The Paramount guys, they were all there. Although I think it was just Ben Hecht who got the letter that said the only competition is idiots. Uh, the famous letter.
What
I
about
don't know
the
if
the,
anyone.
the 200-page screenplay of Kane that he wrote before Orson Welles came in?
Well, he wrote it. He wrote it. I think it was even longer than that. I think it was like a 300-page doorstopper. And it's funny, they have Charles Lederer, um, the nephew of Myrna Davies in the movie, go off with it. And as early as I think the early 70s, Peter Bogdanovich actually interviewed Charles Lederer and said he just went there and read the script, and he never felt that it was actually even about specifically Hearst. He felt it was about Robert McCormick, who was a figure they both really hated.
Mm-hmm.
And he gave his okay on the movie. He thought the script was pretty weak. And he thought that it definitely it was not that this is your best work. Literer came in and thought it was too long. It didn't quite work. And he never brought it up to Hearst
Well, I
or
remember
Marion
I
Day.
remember Orson Welles in the Bogdanovich interview, which, I think we both have this sort of love-hate thing with Bogdanovich, where I'm
I
a
hate
fan.
that we're not.
Yeah, well, I'm a fan of his work, and but I also, you made a point to me one time where you said you think that he lies about things that these filmmakers have said, and I think there's some truth to that.
Absolutely.
And we had that whole bit where it's like Bogdanovich is like this guy who shows up and one-ups you, like you're at a party and you're like, hey, I just got this movie made, and then he shows up with some girls on his arms and he's like, well, I studied John Ford. I met all these great directors. I made the Last Picture Show. Because
Ford wouldn't have done that.
you do that great Bogdanovich.
Well, Ford wouldn't have done it that way.
But
I used to be able to do a really great
yeah, because we had
Bogdanovich.
we had that
Well,
whole
I
bit where he shows
don't
up.
think Ford would have done it that way.
Yeah.
Howard Hawks, I don't think you would have done it this way. What I love about Bringing Up Baby is that I made a movie just like it. And it's an homage.
No, because I've just seen him in interviews and he just like there's a Bret Easton Ellis interview with Bogdanovich that I really hate where he goes on about the Second Amendment for like 20 minutes.
Oh,
And then he talks about when he made Seconds and it was all about a horror film was about guns because that's what the true horror was, or guns are scarier than slashers. And but he also talked about like how because he was offered The Godfather and he turned it down because he didn't want to make a movie about violence. Um, but he thought that Coppola was more clever than he was because he said casting Marlon Brando was really clever, and he's like, I wouldn't have done that. That was clever. Um,
Orson wouldn't have done that.
but from
Orson wouldn't have done that.
but I remember from the Orson Welles interview, and don't get me wrong, I'm not acting like Orson Welles was the truth teller. Orson Welles is one of the all-time bullshitters. Orson Welles was a master
He had such
bullshitter.
great fucking stories.
Yeah, but I remember in the Bogdanovich interview, he said that he thought the main thing that got left over from the Mankiewicz scripts was the Rosebud element. But he claimed that in that interview, that's what I'm going off of. He claimed he rewrote and changed most of the screenplay outside of the Rosebud thing. And he also said that his original concept idea was more something akin to Rashomon, where it would be this non-linear story and then the truth was somewhere in the middle. But then it's sort of like that, but they changed it up a bit where it was more just like a story told in a non-linear fashion going through history or through this man's life.
Yeah, I
Um,
mean, what do we have? We have him writing a first draft that he doesn't use. That's what you have. You have him out in New York writing a first draft that he never uses. It's never recorded, never documented. All people know is that it exists. He took a lot of notes.
but we do have to bring that up. He said that Rosebud was not his idea, and that he wasn't even a
Yeah,
fan
no.
of
And
the
also,
Rosebud thing. He doesn't even really like it. He thinks it's too much of like a movie conceit sort of thing.
The Woman on the Ferry, which is his favorite thing he ever directed, was done by Mankiewicz. And beautifully done in the movie, I would say.
Did they have as much of an antagonistic relationship as this movie portrays at the end of it? Because I don't feel like that's true. I
Well, I will say just what I've learned from
like. Do you picture Orson
people.
Welles throwing shit in a house and yelling at Mankiewicz? Did that? I mean,
Oh
that
yeah, it happened. It
that
happened.
happened.
This is based on a book. I've read two books. I am Mank should have been consulted for this fucking movie. Uh, by
Yeah,
Richard Merriman,
yeah.
which over the past few months has become quite expensive. The wonderful book I recommend to everyone who's interested in this period of Hollywood, which is The Brothers Mankiewicz. And it's mostly about the more famous brother, Joseph Mankiewicz, who's in the movie, um, and really overshadows his brother in the
Mhm.
historical context. But The Brothers Mankiewicz is fantastic. Those two books and the I would say the kind of ultimate Citizen Kane book that Harlan Lebo put together. Um, Harlan Lebo is a really interesting historian and writer, and he makes the history of Citizen Kane really great. And that book came out,
Directed
I don't know, maybe
Sleuth, one of
5 years
my
ago.
one of my favorite movies of all time.
Is that right?
Yeah, he was the director of Sleuth, Joseph Mankiewicz. I mean, Schaffer wrote it, Anthony Schaffer, Peter
Oh, yeah.
Shaver's, but yeah, Mankiewicz directed it.
Um, of course, famously, he produced Philadelphia
Well,
Story.
yeah, yeah.
Got a lot of movies together. Um, so yes, no, it is true. There is famous story about Orson Welles getting pissed and throwing things, and I believe it wasn't regarding the script. He was just drunk and pissed off and throwing things. Herman Mankiewicz was there,
Okay, that sounds
and
more. That sounds legitimate. Not that. Okay, that sounds believable. That a drunk Orson Welles.
drunk Orson Welles was throwing things, and Herman Mankiewicz was there, and apparently based it off of Orson throwing things, including at him. And what it was what do they call those candles that ward off mosquitoes?
I know
Um,
what you're talking about.
Citronella or something like that.
Yeah.
It was they were still lit, and he was just throwing them. That's the story of what that's really based on.
Okay, so I want to move on here real quick because we have some other topics to cover. Okay, so let's bring up the Pauline Kael essay, "Creating Kane," and how this relates to Jack Fincher, because apparently he based
Called
more of
Raising.
he made he based more of his screenplay off of this, which has been a very discredited essay by Pauline Kael, who, like, Bogdanovich is another figure that I'm very, and Bogdanovich in particular was a critic of this, because Pauline Kael, I think you told me once you thought that she was really onto something with this whole auteur thing, that she was like, she really thought that she. I love that you said that she doesn't know how a movie's made. And if you
Yeah,
don't
it's
know,
true.
if you don't know who Pauline Kael is, because I don't think that young people or anyone who's like an internet critic gives a fuck about Pauline Kael. But you hear Tarantino bring her up a lot. She was a very prominent film critic, like a Roger Ebert or a Gene Siskel, that people, a lot of filmmakers or writers still bring up in regard. Me and him we've both read her reviews and have talked about her a lot. And I think in the last, I don't know, 10, 15 years, she's just kind of become a forgotten, outside of people who are sort of cinephiles. I think she's become rather forgotten because I think her reviews don't hold up for a reason. I think she was wrong about a lot of things. I'd say she
Well,
was
and of course, a lot of critics are, and everyone has their opinion, but she was really wrong in Raising Cain. I've got the Citizen Kane book right here, and it's interesting looking at the shooting script, which I believe is the
well,
fourth
I would say
draft
she was one of the early
after many
people.
third drafts.
I feel like
But
she was one of the early people that started like the whole contrarian critic sort of trend,
I
where
mean, yeah, she was heavily opposed to Andrew Sarris.
yeah,
Andrew Sarris, who's the critic people should be reading,
yes,
who's the far superior film critic, in my opinion. But Pauline Kael was just a better writer. She wrote great negative reviews, great positive reviews. Her taste was, her particular taste. But yeah, she didn't know anything about making movies. Andrew Sarris did. Interviewed directors, he interviewed writers quite extensively, including Orson Welles.
Well, that's the
And it
discussion
was the
about.
main American component of the auteur theory
Well, that's the
in
main
the
debate with
early
criticism
60s.
that's always existed and even you and I being critics, or this falls even into the collegiate professor sort of thing. There's a feeling with a lot of people, and artists typically feel this way, is that critics are people who are typically a failed artist criticizing other people's work as if they're the expert on this because they're a film historian or film essayist. And you see these confrontations. There's this famous one with Vincent Gallo where he goes against his critics when Buffalo 66 came out, or Tarantino's on this Charlie Rose roundtable with a bunch of critics, and he's asking them what they thought of Jackie Brown, and they won't tell him at the table because they're intimidated to say it to his face. And it's something I often struggle with as a film critic, because I feel like I'm pretty informed and I should be able to, in the day of the internet, everyone's a critic now. But then I often think in my head, in the back of my head, well, it's like, well, I'm also sort of a failed artist doing this at the same time. Like, I am an unsuccessful filmmaker shitting on successful filmmakers with their stuff that I don't like, thinking that I can do it better. Um, and I think there's a bit of that at play in this movie too. I think there's a bit of that, not necessarily film criticism, but the ego of the artist and what the auteur is, and Orson Welles is this mythical figure, and Fincher sort of playing with that a little bit. Um, but this Jack Fincher screenplay leans more towards the Pauline Kael
Yeah, I mean
side.
the screenplay is based on Raising Cain,
Mm-hmm.
which is historically inaccurate. That was addressed almost immediately with the Cain Mutiny, a piece Peter Bogdanovich wrote, and also several other essays. And it turns out she largely plagiarized uh, the information she had from a UCLA professor, which is quite funny because she says Orson Welles takes all the credit for it. And, I think there's a certain attraction for a writer to say, hey, this hotshot actor, director, who's always been credited as doing everything on his first movie, he, he turns out he didn't really write it. He didn't do anything. And there's a lot of joking comments that Herman Mankiewicz made, that Orson Welles made against Mankiewicz. And I think it speaks volumes that there is a page, and you can look this up, of Citizen Kane, where it just says Orson Welles and Herman Mankiewicz. Orson Welles circled Herman Mankiewicz, drew a little arrow above his own name. I think that works as a sign of how the script came about. Just like how he shares billing with Greg Toland. Toland, Toland showed him how to make this movie, just like Mankiewicz did with the writing.
I'm going to bring up a David Fincher quote here that ties into this, and I want your opinion on this because I feel very. If another filmmaker was saying this, I think this would just entirely piss me off. But David Fincher, as one of the great directors, I think is one of the only people that has a right to say these kind of things. He's someone that I do think is intelligent. So I do value his opinion. David Fincher. Orson Welles is a talented filmmaker, but definitely not a film god like he's often regarded as. Speaking to a French outlet premiere, Fincher was asked about his thoughts on Welles. This is clearly a question aimed at Fincher because of his feature film Mank. Fincher went on to say, well, I think Orson Welles' tragedy lies in the mix between monumental talent and filthy immaturity. Sure, there is genius in Citizen Kane. Who could argue? But when Wells says it only takes an afternoon to learn everything there is to know about cinematography, let's say this is a remark of someone who has been lucky to have Greg Toland around him to prepare the next shot. Greg Toland, damn it, an insane genius. I say that without wanting to be disrespectful to Wells. I know what I owe him, like I know what I owe Alfred Hitchcock, Ridley Scott, Steven Spielberg, George Lucas, or Hal Ashby. But at 25, You don't know what you don't know. Period. Neither Welles nor anyone. It doesn't take anything away from him, and especially not his place in the pantheon of those who have influenced entire generations of filmmakers. But to claim that Orson Welles came out of nowhere to make Citizen Kane, and that the rest of his filmography was ruined by the interventions of ill intentioned people, it's not serious, and it's underestimating the disastrous impact of his own delusional hubris. While some may scoff at what Fincher says about Welles, in the decades after Citizen Kane, when Welles struggled to live up to the acclaim of his feature debut, there were many who started to wonder how much of the success was due to the filmmaker and how much was due to his talented crew. In Fincher's eyes, that's the real question, and points to the fact that Welles might have been talented, but maybe not as talented as he actually believed he was.
Well, my first thing I'll say about that is that quote he brings up of Orson Welles about learning how to direct a film in 30 minutes. It's referring to 30 minutes a day, and he's making that joke on the 1970 Dick Cavett show, Jack Lemmon, who's about to direct his first feature.
I've heard him say that
And
in another interview too, though. I
and
actually do think
he
he says
also
that.
says it in reference to the phrase he'll say after it, that Greg Toland just told me what to do. I didn't know anything about it. I directed theater. I thought I had to move all the lights around.
Yeah.
I had to move all the lights around.
Well, I remember what
And
the
Toland
quote.
showed me how to direct. And I mean, Greg Toland, for those of you who don't know, he was the cinematographer on some of the greatest films in motion picture history. You know, around that time, he did Grapes of Wrath and The Long Voyage Home, The Westerner, right before he did Citizen Kane. And he wanted to work with Orson Welles, and as the legend says, because he wanted to see what a director who had never made a film would do and try to make it happen.
But I remember what Wells was saying in the one interview I listened to where he talked about this. He wasn't necessarily saying, because Fincher says that you can learn everything about cinematography, and that's not what I remember him saying. He was saying that basically you learn what a close up, a medium shot, and a wide shot is, and how that works in symmetry with your blocking and editing in a very quick amount of time. And he said that anyone that tells you otherwise is lying. And I think there's truth to that statement. I think that there is a myth about filmmaking being I think a lot of art forms. I think we're learning this, especially in the technology age, with us having more access to equipment that we didn't have before. Back in the day, if you wanted to make a movie or you wanted to record a good sounding album, you needed money, and you needed people with resources. You didn't have digital. You couldn't do GarageBand on your computer. You couldn't edit digitally. You had to get people with the equipment to do something well. This is why independent cinema was so different back in the day. You had to get back when Tarantino made Reservoir Dogs for $1 million, he could make that film now for much cheaper. And there's kind of this illusion to art that, like, wow, you can never achieve this mastery, that you can with filmmaking. But I think there's some truth to the fact that some of these filmmakers or musicians or anyone, and this is where streaming music became controversial, our ownership of art, they try to act like it's unachievable in a sense that, oh, it's so hard to learn these things. And I'm not talking about the great filmmakers, the Martin Scorsese's, but your typical Hollywood LA director hack that isn't anything fucking special. And I think if you're a reasonably intelligent person, I don't think that stuff's that hard to figure out. I'm not talking necessarily about cinematography and lighting and all that, because there's a lot of science and there's a lot of math to that, and you have to have an eye for that. That's something a lot of people are just gifted with. But that's more what I took from the quote that Orson Welles was saying. Not that you become a master of cinematography, but that you can learn basically how a film is put together and made reasonably quickly, which I don't
And
think I don't think is untrue.
Wells is clearly a great communicator with his cinematographers. He doesn't just continue to work with Greg Toland. Magnificent Ambersons has the great Stanley Cortez, who was the cinematographer on Night of the Hunter. Then he works with Rudolph Maté.
Mm-hmm.
Then he works with some of, like, who was on Touch of Evil. It was God, Russell Meddy. Um, Cinematographer, and he works with all of these people, and yet his films always come out looking fucking great. You watch Chimes at Midnight, it
Yeah.
looks fucking great. He was a great communicator of what he needed to see. A deep focus he did in Magnificent Ambersons with the moving set, and he did in Citizen Kane, which was pioneering, and that Greg Toland was the one who really pulled it off.
Well, that's
He communicated that. That's what he wanted. That's what he pictured in his mind's eye.
well, that's what a director
And
is in a lot of ways. You're communicating to the like. It's not like you build the sets when you make a movie. David Fincher isn't building his sets in his movies. He's telling his set department what he wants the movie to look like. He's telling the cost. Like David Fincher isn't sewing costumes for his goddamn movie.
yeah,
Like there's
and
something very disingenuous about that quote.
if you want to know what the script looked like, Harlan Lebo, who wrote Citizen Kane: A Filmmaker's Journey, has quite a few of the versions of the script um, online. You can look at them for free, read them, and see what you think. The dinner sequences were vapid until Orson tinkered with them and turned the dinner sequences into a dinner sequence, or the breakfast sequence, as it was. The
Well,
breakfast of the married couple,
well,
right?
I think it is
Where
the theater background that makes a lot
Citizen
of that
Kane's
work
one of his
special.
most famous
Yeah,
movies. One of the most famous movies of all time. One of its most famous scenes.
because I think that's what Friedkin said. Friedkin in an interview. What makes Wells still stand out today is not just that the craft and but it was his mix of blocking with camera movement because he had that theater background and he understood blocking in a way that a lot of filmmakers don't. Because a lot of filmmakers either come from like in Elia Kazan, you come from a theater background, and then now a lot of filmmakers come from more of an editing background. So you think about cuts. But what made Orson Welles so special, besides a lot of elements, was that he knew how to match a movement of actor to the frame with the camera. And that's why a lot of those shots in Citizen Kane, besides the deep focus in that, it's the movement inside of the camera with the movement. And a lot of that stuff is Orson Welles. And it's in all of his movies. And it's part of the brilliance of them. Like in Ambersons, it's movement with what's happening in the frame, the mise en scene, with the camera movement. And he's one of the best at that ever lived. And that comes from his theater background, and also him just knowing radio and all that. He knew presentation, Orson Welles. He really got the theatricality of performance in movies and stuff like that. And I think, I don't know what do you take? Is there anything? What do you take from that Fincher quote? I guess. What do you think? Where do you think he's coming from with that?
Pause for a second here. I've got to get a drink.
Okay.
I think Fincher kind of takes the quote out of context, and someone who definitely sees that the auteur theory isn't exactly true from practical standpoint, and it's been a product of corporate filmmaking. He came out of the era of music videos. That's what he did. He did commercials. He did the cigarette smoking fetus. Look it up. And he worked on Alien 3. He knows what it's like to make a movie. It's not a one man job. I think that's how he's approaching it. As for the historical accuracy, some of the very funny points, secretary, husband, is not in the war. His ship was not sunk because he wasn't a soldier. He was a uh, European immigrant, and also Aaron Mankiewicz was a conservative. As far as I know, he's never said anything about Upton Sinclair. And guy who killed himself did not exist. That's not a real person.
Yeah,
That's probably the key takeaway.
I was very confused during that because I was like, I've never heard of this guy. And I couldn't figure it out. Now you're telling me it was made up because I was sitting there and I was like, who the fuck was this guy? How do I not know about this?
Not joking. I thought, man, am I missing something?
I
I
did
thought I
too.
really knew this era. This guy was around at Paramount right at the late 20s, early 30s, and then he went to MGM. Wow, wow. Also, that performance, the guy from Full Metal Jacket who plays Louis B. Mayer, fantastic. I think he might win Jew of the Year.
So, so we're gonna move on to our next topic here. I want to talk about the cinematography briefly. Now, Fincher's changed up cinematographers here. This is the guy who worked on Mindhunter with Fincher. This is not God. The famous cinematographer who shot Seven, who's worked with Ridley Scott, and then the son of Cronenweth, who did Buckaroo Banzai and Blade Runner, and that his son worked with him for the last several films because Fincher worked with him on Alien 3, which he died. So he's been working with his son, one of the great cinematographer's sons, for several years. This is Eric Messerschmidt, who is mainly just on television. I don't think he's ever shot a film before. I was actually shocked there wasn't a bit more of like a deep focus Citizen Kane look to this movie.
No, it looked a hell of a lot more like a John Ford movie.
Yeah, it didn't have. I thought it was going to look like Kane. I thought that's what he was
He
going
has
for.
homages, like he has a few little visual homages he does to that, but it looks a lot more like John Ford movie mixed with
Yeah, especially
something like
the outside stuff.
Sweet Smell of Success. I mean, a lot of his movies look like fucking Sweet Smell of Success.
Yeah.
That Alexander McKendrick look
Mm-hmm.
um, he has in that movie. But no, it's. I don't think it's meant to look like Kane.
I just saying going in,
And
I thought it was going to be that. I thought that it was going to have a Kane look to it. I was just
the guy does
surprised.
a damn fine job. Um,
Yeah, for a guy who's not
I don't
like
know.
a known cinematographer, I don't know how much of it's Fincher and how much of it, Fincher's one of those directors. Is he as much a director of photography as a cinematographer is? I don't know. You know,
I think he's. You know, people talk about him like that. I
I've
would
heard.
say he probably is. The way he talks about it,
I'd
I
say
think he's pretty damn close.
I think I think
But
I think
I
Fincher
don't think
knows
it's
his
all.
lenses and lighting pretty well. I'm pretty sure. Yeah, I would assume he knows his shit.
And you were talking about Jeff Cronenweth,
Yeah.
uh,
Well, because I'm shocked
who
he
is
didn't
great
go.
cinematographer,
Yeah.
and yeah, the son of Jordan Cronenweth. But
Yeah.
no, he went with the new blood. And
Yeah.
I think it's interesting and a good choice that he did because it reflects the film. You have this 60-year-old guy, right? Although, he may have looked 70. Mankiewicz was only 40 when this film really takes place. Uh, the guy, he really did drink himself into old age.
And Gary
Uh,
Oldman is older than that too.
yeah, but I mean, you take a look at
Yeah.
him, and Mankiewicz really, he drank himself to
I
death.
love
He
how he
really
looks
did.
at the end during the Oscar speech. This like
By his death, also, that Oscar speech thing was a joke.
yeah.
It was not a serious thing. That was a joke.
Yeah, I
And
kind of got I got
also,
Ed Wood vibes at points with stuff like that. Like
yeah,
that was very Ed
yeah.
Wood. That those parts, not the whole movie, but that reminded me a lot of Ed Wood. So an interesting
Herman
thing about
Mankiewicz,
this is
I want to
that
say this. How he died, his blood was literally filled with his own urine.
yeah.
He had piss for blood, man.
So an interesting thing about this is that unlike most digital films where the black and white is done and converted later in an editor, which is a reason I think a lot of black and white digital films don't look right, this was shot in black and white digital in 8K. The camera is specifically made to shoot in black and white. So this was not a thing where they shot a film in color and then went in later and put it in black and white. This was shot in black and white, which I think probably is one of the key differences to this and a lot of digital black and white, because Fincher's digital films look better than a lot of other people's digital films. Although I'm not an anti-digital guy, I don't really live in that bubble. I think digital looks great. I'm not in that Tarantino Spielberg thing where it's like digital doesn't look as good as film, it never will. I'm like, well, one day it's going to look better than anything. It's just how it is. Um, but I was impressed with the cinematography. I was surprised that it did have that more I really like the exterior stuff. I like the outside stuff, like at his
God, yes.
house.
It's so obsessive. I mean, looking at the Hearst Manor, out in San Simeon. I don't know
Yeah.
if you've ever been out there, but it's quite incredible. Just that whole area. Um, and
Yeah,
it really is. You can drive 30 minutes and it looks like a fucking John Ford Western.
that was the thing. It was the
It
outside
looks
stuff that
like young
really
Mr.
got me.
Lincoln.
Yeah, the outside stuff really impressed me. The stuff where they're driving in the cars and they're just out in like the desert, or they're looking at a location. That did remind me of like classic John Ford stuff. I was also curious the editing of the movie. It was very strange in a modern movie to see so many fades and that sort of pacing and being put together like an old, especially that like montage during the New Year's
Yeah, I
Eve
mean,
party.
it is clunky,
It
almost intentionally clunky, I'd have to
Yes.
say.
Yeah, it is
I mean,
clunky.
it comes in with I think it is kind of intentionally clunky, and this isn't an excuse for the film. I think that's genuinely my opinion. The movie has fucking cue marks to change the reel. It also has some very strange deliveries. Very strange.
Yes,
There are a
no.
few takes in there where I'm thinking, fucking Fincher, you do 30 takes notoriously, and that's the one you go with?
I
The
th-
one where Oldman's slipping out of his accent?
I thought so too. And yeah, that was one thing that I
One
was
where Phil Collins' daughter says shitty thing?
yeah, I was thrown off by that too. Some of the editing I thought was very awkward, and I don't know if I really like the digital add-in of the like the cigarette bud the Fight Club thing in the corner. They do that a
Yeah, well,
lot.
that's what I'm talking about. The cue marks.
Yeah, I
He
don't think
does them exactly where the cue mark would be,
yeah,
I believe.
I don't know if that worked for me. That was retro in a way that I didn't really dig.
Yeah,
As
I mean,
I like how
it's
the
really
movie
ostentatious.
it
It's
is.
it's really out there, and he hasn't done that kind of thing in a long time.
No, it was weird. I
This is
mean, that's all I thought
again, this
about
is his
was Fight
passion
Club.
project, right?
Yeah.
It's his passion project. I kept waiting for a fucking dick to appear on
Well,
screen,
even the
but hey,
sound
his dad
mixing,
wrote it.
even the sound mixing that they did it all on the same track, that they did the mono mixing and not multiple tracks like movies are done today. The score and the dialogue and the sounds are all done on one track. Even that was odd. Like, because I actually think the Trent Reznor and Atticus Ross score is fucking great, but it's not that prominent in a lot of scenes in the movie. Like, I wish it was because of the
It
sound
is, and I
mixing.
like the mono.
I don't hate. I mean, they're on the score. The score I think is actually going to be like one of the underrated, overlooked things about this movie. Because we're so used to scores being in our face and bombastic nowadays, and this score really isn't for a lot of the movie. But if you're actually listening to it, it's a really, really good score.
And Atticus Ross and Trent Reznor, the Pixar movie this year, which is also kind of a character study about an artist,
Yes,
Soul.
yeah, Soul,
It's
yeah.
fucking funny they did that. No, it's a wonderful score.
Uh,
It's really not reminiscent and reliant on Kane.
no, no, that was the real surprising thing to me. But yeah, I think my biggest issue out of any of those types of things, I definitely think some of the editing was wonky, and some of the things I wasn't. I get what he was going for, but I don't know. It was almost like too obvious or cutesy for me. I didn't think it was clever. Um, I think there's one too many fades for my taste personally.
Honestly, that's not what I would be complaining about. The only thing I complain about as far as this movie, I think its historical inaccuracy is part of the movie. You know, it's a speculative fiction history.
Yeah.
Um,
Well,
I mean, it's like a conspiracy theory, right? It's like JFK,
yeah, no, it's his
except
JFK for sure, but
less
it's not.
plausible.
Well, it's also way less entertaining than JFK.
Okay, yeah, no, I'm just saying it's his
No,
his
I agree.
JFK
I'm
type
with
movie.
you. I wish this was his JFK though. That's what I'm saying. I wish this was
Oh,
a 3-hour conspiracy theory about Citizen Kane. Like I would
dude,
fucking love it.
Donald Sutherland came in
Yeah,
out,
and and, and talks for
2/3 of the way through.
yeah, it gives 10 minutes of exposition.
I
Yeah,
was rewatching JFK, and it's more than that. The talk is longer than 10
no, it's
minutes.
insane. No, I wish this movie was
Sutherland just
that.
keeps talking.
I have no problem with this movie being inaccurate. That doesn't bother me at all. I don't give a fuck with like people brought that up with Straight Outta Compton. They're like a lot of this isn't true. I'm like I don't care. Like as a fictional movie about NWA, this is entertaining. I don't give a shit if Ice Cube didn't write "fuck the police" in 5 minutes after a cop was a dick to him. I don't care. It makes a good scene in a movie. Like that's irrelevant to me. I just yeah, I wish it was even crazier with that shit. Like I wish Orson Welles had like you brought up earlier, like at the end, I wish it had been at the end that Orson Welles like turns into this creature or like the movie like inverts on itself and stuff like that. Or Orson Welles is directing the
Yeah,
movie. Like I wish it had went that
yeah.
crazy.
Fuck it, I wish it had too, because I think people might take some of this stuff for fact. I don't know about any controversy, but I do know that people do take some of this stuff for fact, and it really isn't true.
Yeah, because I don't know if the movie
As
leans
far as
into the
I know.
absurdity enough. Like I don't because
And
the movie plays it pretty straight. Like if you watched it and you didn't know anything about this, you would think that some of this stuff is true.
although, why would you watch it if you didn't know anything about it?
Well, that's the other thing about the movie. How good is this movie without going in with knowledge of what the subject matter is if you just watch this movie blindly as opposed to other Fincher films?
Although, yeah, so if you hadn't watched Citizen Kane or don't know about it.
Yeah,
But
if you
then
don't know
again, who
anything.
gives a fuck about your opinion if you haven't seen Citizen Kane and don't care about it? And I'll say that. I might sound like a snob. I don't give a fuck.
No, but even let's say you're just somebody who saw Citizen Kane once or twice and that's about as much as you know about it. And then you watch this movie. I'm very curious about that part of it. This is a weird like
I am
insider
too,
movie.
honestly.
You have to kind of know things to get it fully, which isn't like all of Fincher's other movies. Like I think Zodiac's a rich movie if you know a lot about it, but also you could watch Zodiac and that'll make you want to go learn more about it. Where I don't know if
Yeah,
this
this
film
movie might piss you off.
yeah.
I think that's true. It might piss you off. I mean,
Yeah, that's what I'm
watching it,
saying.
it's so out there. If you know about Herman Mankiewicz, yes, he was really anti-war, but there's this weird sequence in the movie where he's like Oscar Schindler.
I
He's like
know.
Oscar Schindler, and he's like the maid, the Fraulein, was like he came and with his submachine gun saved our village from the
That's
Nazis.
my least favorite fucking part in the movie. Is when she tells the
My least
story to
favorite.
the girl, and she's like, "He saved it. He took our whole village, and he brought us all here to work." And then the woman brings him a drink, like, "You're a good
Yeah,
man." No, it's so Schindler's List. She's like,
yeah,
"Fine,
and
you can
Gary
drink
Oldman
yourself to
saying,
death."
"I could have done more. I could have written 3 screenplays about how Hitler's a shit."
No, what the fuck was that?
That and the bizarre discussion they have, with Hearst and Marion Davies. It's
Yeah.
so strange. That big round table scene,
Yes.
um,
Weird.
he was very anti-war before Pearl Harbor, as a lot of Americans were. But the whole the whole I'll just say the whole Oscar Schindler thing. Um, I've never heard about anything like that. Now there could be some information I've never heard about, but as far as I know,
As far as a scene in a movie, though, it doesn't really like. It's so like
no, it doesn't work.
I was
I was
laughing at
thinking,
it.
what
You
the
know.
fuck is this shit? I've never heard of any of this.
What's the meaning of this
Um,
shit?
what is the meaning of this shit?
What's the meaning of this shit?
Gets our "What's the meaning of this shit" award for this movie. The Adrian Brody Grand Budapest "What's the meaning of this shit." The fucking Schindler's List scene where he saved all these people and they're now working for him.
He has some sort of Jewish town, yeah. Like he's
Yeah.
they're all a bunch of Smurfs making a goddamn script for him.
They're right. The script is life itself.
Yeah.
The script, every word. I could have written more, Orson. I could have written more.
One more script. Yeah.
Please.
No, Mank.
He kisses the.
How much is one worth to you?
He kisses the girl, and they're talking. He's like, he loves the women. I saw this girl. She was very pretty.
I don't do the work. Oh, yeah. It's the presentation.
The presentation. I do the presentation.
No, Mank, it's the presentation.
No, I know.
Breakfast scene. It's the presentation.
No, it's so fun. And it's never brought up again. It's just a one-off thing.
Yeah. So as far as I know, the only thing about the refugees is that Franz, Joseph and Herman's father, was involved with sponsoring refugees. And Fran Mankiewicz was a very critical, intellectual person who was he was really tough on his sons. And he was a German Jew, and I believe he helped quite a few German Jews get to the U.S. And both Joseph and Herman, I believe, helped him in that endeavor. I know especially Herman did sponsor quite a few Jews from Eastern Europe, as did, I think, William Wyler. William Wyler was a big part of that initiative too.
Mm-hmm.
He directed Best Years of Our Lives. Fantastic movie. But
I think to this day he's won Best Director more than anyone. William Wyler.
Is that right?
I believe so. I could be wrong. At one point that was true. I don't know if that's still true. I think he won Best Director like 3 times or something.
I heard Fincher quote something about Mank quite a while ago when he first started making this movie. And he said something that I kind of shuddered at, which is Mankiewicz. Fincher said something along the lines of, Mankiewicz was the kind of guy who he worked on not Gone with the Wind. He worked on Wizard of Oz. And he said, starts in black and white. When they get into Munchkin Land, it's color. And walks off set. And what really happened is that he worked on that first draft and wrote about 150 pages. No one liked any of it. After they switched screenwriters a few times, the only thing that remained was it's black and white in Kansas. They're going to switch it to color. And they get into Munchkin Land. It wasn't just a beautiful quip.
I don't know why it's so funny every time you say Munchkin Land, but when they get to Munchkin Land, Mank.
Munchkin Land, Mank. I want to look tall in it.
I just want little people.
How can we make Joseph Conton look shorter?
Okay, so let's move on to our next topic. What this means for Netflix. As you know, as you know, it got announced recently that HBO Max is going to put Dune, Wonder Woman, pretty much all the big releases. So there's going to be no major release for the rest of the year. Christopher Nolan's outraged about this. People are saying this is the death of cinema because the streaming services are going to take over. I don't think this movie has much impact on that. I think this movie would have bombed had it been released in theaters and wasn't a Netflix. It was made
specifically for Netflix, so...
Yeah, I even think how it kind of looks and plays as a movie makes sense as streaming. But I do think what makes this movie interesting, as opposed to, let's say, like A Beast of No Nation by Cary Fukunaga, which I think is like a cinematic movie, I think this is a streaming movie. And I don't think
It
we've
is.
got. I don't
Skip
think.
around on it. It's fun. Watch the movie once, skip to the parts you like. The Paramount sequence,
Yeah,
right.
I don't think we've gotten a lot of streaming movies. I think we got a lot of movies that were bought and then put on streaming services. Where this is one
Um,
of the only movies I can think of that feels like it was made to be watched at home on Netflix very deliberately.
I mean, he made it for Netflix. I think Fincher knows what he's doing.
It's upsetting though. I guess there's a bit of a disappointment waiting 6 years for Fincher to make a movie, and this is what he does. Because my only fear is like, what if he doesn't make another movie for years now? I'm a bit like if he makes a
Yeah, I
movie,
was thinking about that too.
if he
In
made a
my
movie
opinion,
like 2 or 3 years from
still has
now, I wouldn't care. Like if he's gonna make a movie soon after this, but I have a fear that like we're not gonna get another Fincher movie.
here's my controversial and not oft repeated opinion on this. This is he hasn't made a movie since Gone Girl. He's only made a TV movie.
I,
That's what we got.
like an
Mank is
HBO movie from back in the '90s or something. That's what this reminded me
Mank is the
of.
best TV movie I've seen in years.
Yeah. I remember the King's Speech came out. That's all I thought was like, this is a fucking TV movie, and it won Best Picture.
Mank is a TV movie.
I
Me,
I agree. I don't think it's a movie
it's
movie.
a TV movie.
It is.
It
I
was
agree.
made for TV. And that's what Netflix and Hulu and Amazon, maybe not Amazon Prime because you can do so much stuff with it. Hell, you can order a fleshlight with it,
Yeah.
and that's the
Get
equivalent of watching Mank.
get it free shipping in a day. Yeah, I agree. This
Was
reminded
that
me.
good?
This reminded me of like the HBO TV movies, not like a network TV or movie. This reminded me of like when HBO did Late Shift, the David Letterman, Jay Leno movie or something. It reminds me of those kinds of movies.
You know what it
Um,
reminds me of? This whole time, it's bothered me. I want to bring this up.
okay.
Also, they have Irving Thalberg be a complete piece of shit, which is really, he's a very important man and also a boy wonder.
I didn't like the
And he's
actor
kind of
playing Irving Thornburg. I thought he was like a caricature and not.
yeah. Well, no, the writing of it was the problem.
Yeah, I guess it would be tough to perform.
This is what the movie reminded me a lot of RKO 281.
Mm-hmm.
If you remember that
Of course.
TV
Of
movie
course.
at the making of Citizen
I
Kane,
thought about that
where
too.
John Malkovich plays Mank and Liev Schreiber plays Orson Welles
Mm-hmm.
and Roy Scheider plays George Schaefer. And God, Liam Cunningham plays fucking Greg Toland.
Yeah. That's my disappointment with this. I feel like we didn't get a Fincher movie. I feel like this is a bit of an extension of the House of Cards Mindhunter thing. And we didn't
It is.
and we didn't get another cuz Gone Girl was a fucking movie. And it made a lot of fucking money and it was a big deal and I still have watched it a few times since it came out and I still really dig it and he was coming off a run there of like, Social Network, Dragon Tattoo, that movie. And I'm like, God, fuck, are we never gonna get another David Fincher movie? Is it just gonna be this Netflix thing? He's not a kid anymore. He's pushing 60, David
Yeah,
Fincher.
he is.
So I have a fear of like we're never gonna get like a David Fincher movie again.
I think we will. I think we will. Uh, he's burnt. I mean, the whole idea of this movie was he was burnt out on Mindhunter. I That's what he said a while ago. Now it's confirmed. There's no season 3 for Mindhunter. He doesn't want to do it, which is sad for all the Mindhunter fans, which I would count myself among them.
Yeah, I really dug
But
the second season of Mindhunter in particular.
yeah, yeah.
Um,
Um,
I just hope if he makes another movie for Netflix, it's more of like a David Fincher movie and not like an experiment, something he made for his father. I would like for him to make, or
I
a
want to
mini,
see the movie next for his mother. I think that one would be really fucked up.
or a mini series or something. I don't know, like a 6 episode
A fuck
thing.
miniseries, man. It's like we talked about, the whole Queen's
Queen's
Gambit
Gambit
thing.
thing, yeah. Okay,
Fuck miniseries. It's easy mode for a filmmaker.
yeah. So let's move on to Oscar chances. How many nominations do you think this is gonna get? Do you think it's gonna win?
I don't know. I didn't know they were doing the Oscars this year.
They are.
Who gives a fuck? No one's gonna watch it. I'll say that shit.
I'm guessing.
No one's
I'm
no
guessing.
one's gonna watch it.
I mean, no one was
Um,
watching it before. Yeah, it's gonna be
but if
Jimmy Kimmel
anyone
by
watches it,
himself.
they're gonna see. Yeah, no one's gonna show up. No one's gonna watch it, and I would say Gary Oldman's not gonna win
I
anything.
would like a cardboard cutouts of all the actors with like screens of their faces in the chairs.
It's gonna be the actress who played Marion Davies, Amanda Seyfried.
Yeah. Who I've
Um,
never liked that. I thought she was kind of like a revelation in this. I really liked Amanda Seyfried in this movie a lot, and
yeah,
I never
she
thought
really
she
reminded me of her character in Mean Girls.
and she was like really good looking in this.
Yeah, she was.
She looked
Um,
great, like in this fucking movie. She looked great in the costume, and like she looked
hey,
great with.
Mr. Messersmith, which is like I think the name of the Nazi
Yeah,
aircraft
yeah.
company,
I don't think this
like the
is gonna.
Messersmith Comet.
I don't think this is gonna win. I think this is gonna get like a lot of Oscar nominations. I think it'll get like 12 nominations, and I don't think it's gonna win anything. I think that
I think
movie.
Amanda Seyfried might win.
I agree, and I think the score has a chance. And
It's gonna lose out to the score for Soul, probably.
I also think like production design or something like that, it might sneak in there because there's this other movie that's out that's based off a play by the guy who wrote Fences that's on Netflix, and it's getting more acclaim and love, and it feels like it's gonna win Best Picture. It's this whole one
Is
long
that
day.
Wilson? August Wilson?
Yeah, it's the last Chadwick Boseman movie. It's like this recording session with this jazz group all in like one day in like a basement under a bar, and they made a movie out of it, and it feels like that's gonna win Best Picture. I can't remember the name of it, but it's like getting like super critically acclaimed, and I feel like because it's got the black thing, it's got a better chance of winning Best Picture. Um, because I feel like they're gonna go that way this year. They're probably gonna like try to give it to a black movie. Um,
Billing.
yeah, because
But,
this was the George Floyd year and Black Lives Matter, and I think that's got because there's not a COVID movie out.
George Floyd.
He's the lead actor of this movie I'm talking about. Um, so yeah, I think maybe a couple
What's
Oscar.
COVID? Who's COVID?
By the way, I read a thing that Michael Bay's producing a movie to come out next year that's about a strand of COVID called COVID-23, and that's gonna be the name. And it's
Wow.
about like it killing the world, and it's like a day after tomorrow strand COVID-23.
Do you think he wrote his own article for The Onion?
I
Is that what Michael Bay does now? He
so
writes his own fake Onion articles?
I
God,
would
remember The Onion? Remember when that existed?
yeah, that it was a fuck yeah, it was like a big no. I remember every day like people would post Onion articles like that, and everybody like it was hype every day. It was I remember when Cracked was a big thing.
No.
Cracked.com was a big thing. It's called
Looking back, I don't miss it.
Miss Ma Rainey's Black Bottom.
It sounded so racist the way you said it.
Yeah, I said it the white yeah, which is August Wilson.
Miss Ma Rainey's Black
Which
Bottom.
I believe all of August Wilson stuff is based in Pittsburgh. But very famous playwright, wrote Fences, which Denzel Washington adapted a few years ago. James Earl Jones famously played back in the 80s. But
It was a terrible adaptation.
this project, I liked Denzel's performance in it, but I wasn't big on the movie.
Denzel's performance was awful.
I think it was one of his more interesting. Well, that's just one of my. I mean, I can't quote the speech here but that whole thing where it's like, "Who says I gotta like you?" That's
Who
one of
says
my.
I've gotta like you?
That's one of my all-time favorite monologues in anything. Like, I don't. You got clothes, right? You get fed. You got a roof over your head. But originally it was a 10-picture deal with HBO, and then it got moved to Netflix. But it's Chadwick Boseman's last movie, and it's like super, super critically acclaimed. And I feel like it's probably gonna win Best Picture right now. If I had to
That Black
bet,
Panther.
yeah,
Black Panther. I remember the day he died.
yeah, it was
I
weird.
was visiting a friend, and the next day, Hulu had a documentary out called Black Panther or Chadwick Boseman, Death of a King, something like that.
Like a
And I
bit. That
was
sounds
just
like a
thinking
Biggie
we were kings.
documentary.
Um, I was just thinking we were kings.
Yeah,
That that
Muhammad
documentary with
Ali. Yeah,
Muhammad Ali. Um,
one of my
Chadwick Boseman,
one of my favorite
we
documentaries of
were
all time.
kings, but he was not a king or a boxer. He played a king, like Laurence Olivier.
Okay, so we'll move on to the last things real quick. I had topic Orson Welles, but I feel like we covered a lot of that. I guess what I would say is that I'm not 100% with this, but I would like to see Orson Welles done better in a movie at some point. I remember there was that movie that,
Watch
uh,
F for Fake.
yeah,
This
but
guy made it, and he does a great Orson Welles
I
impersonation.
remember Richard Linklater made this movie, me and Orson Welles, that I liked quite a bit as a movie. But and Vincent D'Onofrio plays him in Ed Wood for a cameo.
Maurice LaMarche voiced that over.
Yeah, I know. But I would like to see a good portrayal of Orson Welles in a movie where he's like I would like to see something with Orson Welles at some point. That's because I
Well,
love Orson Welles, and I think there's a lot of stuff you can do with Orson Welles because there's so many interviews with him and there's so many stories. I would like to see some of those stories made into movies, not necessarily like the making of just stuff that he's talked about that I've never seen, just heard him talk about it. When he talks about the stuff, it is like a radio play. Your imagination just runs with you, the making of this movies. Because his life was extremely interesting. And the stuff he
like
did
him
was,
talking about how he was a little boy in Ireland walking around with a goat and a wagon, and he'd sleep under the wagon, and for work he'd paint pictures, and in winter came and he went into a playhouse and convinced them he was this great American film actor who was trying to go back to his roots in plays, but he was this great young actor who played all these child roles in Hollywood and got the opportunity to play at this playhouse, and that's where he started acting. And they caught on to him,
well, I would
but
just
they
like to see
liked him
the,
so much they kept him.
I would,
That's a movie.
yeah, exact, or like the making of Lady from Shanghai, like just stuff like that. Like I would like to see that period of time, like why he did that horrible accent in that movie, which he regrets doing in the Bogdanovich interview. I've always had an idea for a movie called Peter and Orson and Peter, where it's essentially My Dinner with, or I've thought about it as a play, where it's like My Dinner with Andre, and it's just that interview between Orson Welles and Peter Bogdanovich. But instead of it just being that interview, because you could just listen to that, you actually show a visualization of the things he's talking about. So, like when Andre
For him and
Greg,
Hemingway meeting,
yes, because
they
like,
get into a fist fight.
well, like when Andre
It's
Gregory's telling
funny.
those stories, it kind of plays like a radio play. I would like to see a visualized version of those stories. Like you just cover some things. Like you could do it kind of in a scatter shot way. You see these pieces of Orson Welles' life and these interesting things that are very cinematic. You keep all the good shit that's fun and entertaining because there's so much interesting stuff that we've never seen in a movie. Like even the making of Citizen Kane, if it was done well, that could be a really interesting movie. This guy who's never made a movie before and he's in his fucking 20s and he goes and makes this movie. I mean that could have been a really fun
Gets into a
movie.
fist fight with Ernest Hemingway. I mean, that friendship, that's made for a movie. Who else got into a fist fight?
Yeah,
This is a weird thing. Wallace
Midnight in
Stevens,
Paris, like
Wallace,
Midnight in Paris mixed with this or something, like something like,
Wallace. Now, I don't know about Midnight in Paris, but Wallace Stevens got into a fist fight with Ernest Hemingway, and I think he broke his hand punching Hemingway's face. Howard Hawks, the filmmaker, Hemingway said, "Go and hit me," and he punched Hemingway in the jaw, and Howard Hawks
yeah.
broke his fist. They were good. They were good friends. He broke his fist.
Well, just
All the
that
bones in his
fantasy
hand. Oh,
element, like when Owen
never
Wilson goes
punched
back in
Hemingway.
time and he meets all these people. I think you could do something with Orson Welles like that. I think there's either a fantastical movie with Orson Welles, or I think there's like a biography, or I would just like to see shit with Orson Welles. And by the time I was enjoying this actor when he was on the phone with him, like I said, but by the time I got to the third act, that really did not work for me. I did not like that final scene because I feel like the movie's building up to that moment, and it kind of falls flat, and it sort of hurts the movie a little bit that it builds up to that moment.
Especially because the moment did it happen where he offered him $10,000.
Yes, like
Really,
that
it
should.
doesn't seem like it did.
You think like the Social Network, like it builds up to these confrontations, and we get these great scenes with Jesse Eisenberg, and there's moments like that in Fincher movies that are so good, that he builds up to, that like he has some of the best endings of the last 20 years. Some of his movies just have amazing final like 10 minutes. And I was really getting excited, like, oh my God, Orson Welles is coming out to the house. Here we go. Like this is fucking, and it's doing the cutting back and forth, and it just didn't really work for me, man. I don't think that actor brings it. I don't think the scene's very good. Um, I also find it
It's
very.
really a it's
Yes. A-
doesn't quite work.
And it's weird
Like
because Fincher
it
gives
should
his
have
father
survived.
sole credit for this, and yet he makes a scene in the movie.
Like so blame.
There's a scene in the movie about Orson Welles trying to take away credit from Mankiewicz, and yet at the end Fincher only gave his father credit, which is what he's giving Orson Welles shit for trying to do. So that part's odd to me.
But it's different. Ankowitz he signed an agreement saying he didn't want credit, which was not for Orson Welles, but for RKO, who wanted Orson Welles to have sole credit on everything. So he could keep up this kind of boy wonder as part of selling the movie. And Hearst really did put the whammy down on Citizen Kane,
No, I know.
regardless of how much it was actually about him. And
Mm-hmm.
I've always really
Well,
felt that.
I guess I just didn't. I just feel for Fincher. Like I feel like most of the movie works. I like the movie, but yeah, to build up to that moment, and I'm really liking the stuff at the house with Mank and her.
Oh,
But then whenever it cuts back to the Orson Welles stuff, I just don't. Like you said, a guy who does 50 fucking takes, and that's the best you could get.
yeah,
Like,
like out of the actress who plays Mank's wife, the secretary, some of those scenes are just, it's like, ooh, Lily Collins. Oh man, that's bad. That's bad.
yeah, I found whenever he wasn't setting around and there was scenes like that, I found like whenever it was him with Amanda Seyfried I think like that whole scene where he like walks out of that table and then him and her go talk by the water fountain and all that stuff. I thought that stuff was all wonderful and
Water
great.
fountain, you make it sound like it's grade school.
Yeah,
Although it is
by
great, especially considering I don't think, as far as I know, Mankiewicz was not close friends with Marion Davies.
no, but that stuff feels like a fantasy. It feels like he's walking into this fantasy or something like that. Like he's walking into a Hollywood sort of thing. Like there's things that when he gets out of the car and he gets, I mean, that stuff I think is great. And I think all the stuff with Charles Dance, and I think the stuff where like he's in the meetings and stuff like that, or when he gives the guy the money and all that. I think all that stuff's so much fun and entertaining. I think the New Year's Eve party's a lot of fun where he makes the bet and there's that montage and he's just getting
Which is
drunk.
also inaccurate with the election party.
Mm-hmm. But but
Um,
but I'm fine with all
as
that. It all
far as
works
I know, he wasn't
cinematically.
there. Yeah. And him giving the big speech to Hearst, it works cinematically.
Mm-hmm.
Didn't happen. As far as I know, I'm
Yeah,
not
the
going to
whole
say I'm
the
a
whole
authority.
Don Quixote thing. Like,
As
yeah,
far as I
it's
know,
it's cinematic.
I do know that, of course, famously Orson Welles wanted to make Don Quixote for a few decades.
Yes.
But, um,
A lot of people always
it's,
want to
it,
make Don Quixote, man. Terry Gilliam, years like
uh, never make Don Quixote, kids.
it.
Kids, if you're listening to this,
It it
never make
it
Don
just
Quixote.
doesn't work. You can't do it.
Even Cervantes couldn't do it.
Um,
Ask
I I,
Cervantes.
I get
But when
I
he gives
get
that speech and then he throws up and says, "Don't worry, the white wine came up."
yeah.
That's a famous Mankiewicz quip. He gave at a different occasion when he threw up publicly because he was a fucking mess and said, "The white wine came up with the fish. Don't worry."
I guess I'll just say this. I don't know how Fincher ultimately feels about Orson Welles. I get the vibe that he thinks it might be he's a little overpraised. I think, in my opinion, and I think we've discussed this, I still feel like a lot of young filmmakers are trying to get to where Orson Welles was at, and I don't think Citizen Kane's the greatest movie ever made, but I think Orson Welles' body of work, and I don't think that you can just say that thing Fincher brings up that, oh, well, you can't just say all of his other films didn't reach Kane's level because of studio interference. Well, it's true that he never really got the money and resources that he did with Kane. I don't know why he's acting like that's not true. And it's not like Orson Welles didn't make other great movies besides Citizen Kane. Chimes at Midnight's my favorite Orson Welles movie and my favorite Shakespeare
As we
film.
discussed, it's my favorite as well. And also, you have Touch of Evil.
Yes, one of the
What
all-time
we
great
have with
movies.
Magnificent Ambersons, which everyone knows was interfered with by the studio,
Yes. Or he
and with
didn't
Lady
get
Shanghai,
and he didn't get budgets. Like The Trial's a great movie, but it made that on nothing.
for
Um
Faye, low
yeah,
budget film,
great.
and he knows what he
Yeah.
does with it.
I mean, it's clear with Orson Welles that he was a guy that was working in an era where he couldn't do the kind of stuff he wants to do. He's talking about digital in an interview in the early 70s where he talks about digital cameras. Where he's like, "Well, one day the camera will be like," and he's just explaining how a digital camera works as opposed to a film camera. I mean, I actually think Fincher has more in common with him than he would like to admit. Um and I was kind of hoping there would be a parallel here where Fincher was sort of Orson and his father was Mank, but I didn't.
Well, it's really, yeah. I think that is true. That Fincher is the young kid, and his father, Jack Fincher, and they referred to themselves, as far as I know, on the first name basis. Um, they kind of are that. I
Yeah.
mean, he leaves himself completely open for critical theory. He made his father's script. So I'm going to say it. I'm going to say that this movie, to me, doesn't feel like it's about Citizen Kane. It doesn't feel like it's about Orson Welles. It feels like it's about a guy who's about to turn 60, making a film his father wrote when he was 60, and
I
realizing
agree.
that he is not the boy genius he once was. He didn't die like Irving Thalberg, and he's kind of made a completely well, he's made a completely different type of career than Orson Welles did. But it's a completely different time.
So do you think he's as critical of when he's talking about Orson Welles there in that quote? Maybe he's talking about himself a little bit too.
I'm not a therapist. I'm not a
I do
psychiatrist.
feel like
But
there's something in this movie
I
with
can tell
that
you
though,
this.
with Fincher
He
talking
is
about himself.
he's a guy who knows how to make a fucking movie. And he's a complete obsessive.
Mm-hmm.
That's something that Orson Welles really wasn't.
No.
He liked to sit and edit stuff. He liked to sit and be there. But Fincher's a complete obsessive. I
Well,
would say he's pretty different. Jack Fincher, from what I understand, was a complete obsessive. And it's one of those things where you sit and you think, wow, that reminds me of my father, you know? Way he would sit and think about puzzles for hours on end and think about how do you
right.
solve this particular puzzle, or how did this magician do this particular
Well, this
trick?
movie itself is a bit of a puzzle as a film too, and
You know,
and I
you gotta
feel
get through
like
a couple little layers before you get to the meat of it. The
yes,
heart of becoming an old motherfucker. You're old and no one thinks of you as the Wonder Boy anymore. You're
yes,
you're just being passed around the studio whore.
yeah, you're making a TV movie for a streaming service, you know.
Congratulations.
Yeah, I think I got that from it too. I feel like this in some ways was one of Fincher's most personal films for that.
I would say that's why it gets the bad reviews. Because it is really, it seems pretty personal. Same
Yeah,
with The Game, and same with Benjamin Button, honestly. Those
I
all
ag-
seem pretty big.
yeah, and those are the ones that like we don't that don't get as much love. Well, because
And Benjamin Button,
this is the film you make for yourself. Like this is the artsy the one you make for yourself, not the one you make for the people. Like I don't think this was made for people to love. I think Fincher made this for himself. and for his relationship with his father.
What you have to do is start at the absolute basic.
Which is what?
The relationship with the father.
And I like your point that it's about a guy thinking about his father getting older and then he's getting older. And it was a different kind of... If there's something I like about this, this was a different kind of film from David Fincher. It shares a lot of elements and themes with his other films, but he's never quite made a movie exactly like this. It's definitely different. Outside of the black and white, it's a little bit more intimate in certain ways, and I'm curious about... It makes me think about Fincher in very interesting ways that maybe I wasn't thinking about before. I'm curious. He's a guy I would like to have a conversation with. I'd very much like to talk to him about this movie because there's a lot of things it's got me thinking about.
As far as the black and white goes, remember, John Huston has a great quote where he says something like, unless the color is perfect, the idea can come between the viewer and the idea of the picture.
Right.
The eye can be reflected by the color.
I'd also like to point out before we go into final thoughts, he did direct the very famous music video Vogue, which is in black and white. I don't know why I just thought about that.
Also worked on Return of the Jedi.
I know. Well, that's the
Really
thing.
was that?
It's weird to think about with Orson Welles, because I don't like to just think about Orson Welles as a filmmaker. I think about him as a persona, as an entity that covered all these different things. Like
wine salesman, please.
Yeah, well, just how he talks about, I care about what Orson Welles thought about food and alcohol. I mean, that's how, I just as a person, as an actor, he's one of my favorite actors of all time. I love him in movies. As a theater guy, I mean, I can't think of many people that I would rather sit down and meet that I'll never be able to meet than Orson Welles. I would love to have been friends with Orson Welles. Because
I want to sit in Spain and eat a meal with that man.
Exactly. He's like one of the great, like the way we look at some of these literary giants. I think he has to be looked at in that same way, and I think deservedly so.
Yeah, I would want to be there to see him in blackface playing Othello.
Yeah. See, that's the movie I want to see. Yeah, just make that. Okay, final thoughts and rating. So I think we got to a pretty good point there about what we thought about it. I think that got really interesting about the father thing. I agree. I think we feel pretty close on this movie.
I'm surprised. I thought you were going to dislike it.
I say this. The last 10 minutes kind of rubbed me the wrong way. I didn't like the ending part with Orson Welles. I was enjoying the whole movie until that point, and that made me kind of go, huh, is David Fincher an asshole? And then I was like, am I an asshole?
But so are we.
Yeah, so then I was like, what am I judging? I mean, and David Fincher's so good looking and stuff, I just let it all pass. He's a handsome guy.
David Fincher's so he's a male model.
Well, you ever see, that clip where he's like,
David Fincher is a fucking good looking man. But I do think he is a brilliant filmmaker.
Well, I'll tell you, he is a good looking man. Women, the consensus has been made by women a long time ago that David Fincher is one of the best looking directors.
For some reason, his movies they just turn me on, man.
Well, I think we're all perverts, and that's been the basis of my whole career.
I think we're all perverts.
Then he smiles and looks at the camera. I think we're all perverts, and that's just kind of been the base of my career. Yeah, nothing negative here. I love David Fincher. I think he's the great American director. I think his work holds up with the great foreign films of the last, like the South Korean films. I think should be mentioned with those names. I think when he dies, he's going to be considered one of the greatest directors of all time. And he's made some of my favorite movies of all time. I mean, more than one. And this isn't one of those movies, but I still really enjoyed it. So I'm going to give this, I think it's like an 8 out of 10 movie. I don't think it's like a 9 or a 10. It might even be a 7.5. I think it's a good movie. I think it's a good, it's the classic, you'd give it 3 or 3.5 stars in your review in the newspaper sort of movie. But it's not a great or perfect movie. I don't think it's a perfect version of this movie. I would like to see a biography about someone like Makowitz done by David Fincher and really diving into it. I would like to see a historically accurate movie about some of this stuff, because I think the real story is actually as interesting, if not much more interesting, than what Jack Fincher wrote. But I think on its own level, this is an interesting film about Jack Fincher and about David Fincher's relationship with that, and about the relationship between the writer and the director and the artist, and how writers are treated in Hollywood and how we credit people. So, in a sense that this guy's fighting for his credit, it's also sort of trying to deconstruct and talk about how we look at people like Orson Welles and auteurs and the myths. So it's giving credence to an idea in Pauline Kael's essays about how we see the auteurs, and I think that's an interesting discussion to have, and I think it's an interesting film in that way. So I like the movie. I think it's really entertaining, and I'll probably watch it again. But I do think it is like a movie you have on in the background while you do something else on your computer or make dinner or something. But that's not a bad thing. Where, if I'm watching Seven and I'm getting into it, or I'm watching Zodiac, I'm watching that fucking movie. If Social Network's on and it's like the club scene with Sean Parker, I'm in that movie. And it's just not that kind of Fincher movie.
Yeah, my final thoughts would be this. There's a film with Anthony Hopkins where he plays Alfred Hitchcock. I believe it's called Hitchcock. And there's another Gary
Yes.
Oldman film where he plays Churchill, called
Darkest Hour.
Darkest Hour. That's right. Those movies are pretty fucking forgettable, except for Scarlett Johansson as Jennifer Lee. Other than that, they're pretty fucking forgettable. This is the fantastic version of those. Watch it. The movie is fantastic. It's got about as much bearing to truth as a movie normally has, which is somewhere between 10% to 0%. And it has a good display of what Gary Oldman's packing. What he's got. I think that's this is as good as display as any. This is what he's got. That's it. And as for Fincher, it feels like a deep inhale, not a sigh, not a shout, not a scream, just a nice. That's what it's like.
Yeah, you remember in Top Gun when Goose dies and Iceman's behind Maverick and he does that weird like thing with his nose where he's like sniffing, where he's like Goose died, and he smells. He like smells for a second because Val Kilmer's crazy. It's sort of like that. Just Goose is dead.
Yeah, 'cause Val Kilmer's insane. He can smell the corpse rotting a
No,
mile away.
why
He's
is
like
he
Val
sniffing?
Kilmer's like a cadaver dog.
Why is he sniffing? He's like, we all liked Goose, and then he smells. It's like, what are you smelling?
I smell a body.
Yeah.
I think he was attempting what non-Val Kilmer humans call an emotion, but that's neither here nor there. If you want to see Orson Welles, watch a goddamn Orson Welles movie. Watch Journey into Fear, based on a wonderful book.
Third Man.
John Le Carré, the wonderful writer, died today. I'd like to say, go out and watch Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy. It's better than Mank. Mank's
Yeah.
pretty fucking good.
Yeah, I hope that this opens people up to just go listen to those interviews or even read the Pauline Kael essay or listen to the Bogdanovich interview or do the. I hope that this creates, a thing where people, because me and you have had a lot of conversations about this stuff, and I don't think it's talked about enough, especially on YouTube. It's like it doesn't fucking exist. Somebody will make 20 fucking Star Wars videos, but they're never going to fucking talk about Orson Welles.
We're never going to talk about how Orson Welles liked Last Year in Marion Bad up until the fourth reel, where he thought it turned into a Vogue magazine.
Well, also, every video essay you see on YouTube today.
I don't know.
Literally every video essay you see on YouTube, every video essay, they're just copying and doing a lesser, crappier version of F for Fake.
And
Like every
they're
essay,
doing a crappier version of
every frame of painting doing
Frame of Painting. Who
doing
was
F
doing
for
a crappy version for F Effect?
Yeah, at least his crappy version of F for Fake was like F for Fake. They're just doing a crappy version of him doing exactly. It's true. Like if you want to know where this whole essay structure came from at all, you could even be like, oh, it's Plinkett. It's like, no, go back to that movie, which still feels innovative and amazing and prescient. Um, and I think a lot of Orson Welles' work, I don't think it's dated. I still think he feels like a very modern filmmaker to me.
Yeah. Chimes at Midnight or Falstaff, depending on where you live. Watch it. It's fantastic. If you like Shakespeare, or if you just like Henry IV, like Queen Elizabeth did. If you just like Falstaff, hey, you're just like the Queen of England.
Even that movie,
time.
the battle sequences in that movie, that inspired Braveheart and later Game of Thrones. The fight scenes were inspired by. And Orson Welles had like very low budget
Right.
making that movie, and he had to rely on angles and staging. And it's amazing. It's like one of the most cinematic battle scenes ever put to film. And the only issue with that movie is it's got like one of the worst sound mixes ever, and they've never been able to really fix it. It's like watching a Sergio Leone movie. But beyond that, yeah, Falstaff was always my favorite character that Shakespeare created, and then I found out Orson Welles felt the same way. So it was,
so do a lot of people.
yeah,
I mean, Falstaff's a
Falstaff's
wonderful
great.
character.
Yeah, he is. But to make that movie, to do like, yeah, I'm gonna do the Falstaff movie, like, great fucking idea. But yeah, Chimes, Touch of Evil, this The Stranger. These are all really good movies. And
True.
even Magnificent Ambersons, even though it's unfinished, is a really interesting movie. And has,
yeah. Fantastic. Mr. Arkadin, I think Criterion put that out. The Trial is a wonderful movie.
The Trial. I love all of those movies.
Othello and Macbeth.
Yeah.
Try them out. The Stranger, that's a pretty good one.
Yeah, he has some movies that are really hard to find.
A Mortal Story.
Yeah, there's some that were hard to find for a long time.
I would say The Trial still is.
Yeah. And some have never really got a good restoration. But yeah, that's what we think about Mank. So we both like the movie. I think a lot of people don't like this movie, and I think it's going to be one of Fincher's least liked movies, but I think it's made for a certain kind of person, and I guess we're just those kind of people for this movie. And that's all I would say about it. If you don't like this movie, it's not really, I don't want to say it's like it wasn't made for you, but it's not a movie made for like everybody to like. Fincher clearly made it for.
It's made for David Fincher's dead father. Put on his tombstone and play endlessly. Say, this is the best fucking tombstone any boy has made.
Yeah.
His father in fucking California. I think he's from, what is it, San Pedro or something?
Yeah.
This is the best tombstone anyone's made for their father. Look at all the money I got the Netflix people spend on it.
He's like David Fincher is like, he's like, his dad's dying in bed and he's holding a DVD screen. He's like, Mank. And he drops the disc and they can't figure out what it is. It's burning at
also,
and it's like, it was the movie made for his father.
Rosebud being Marion Davies' clitoris is really, it's not the best evidence there is.
I don't care if there's that's just true in my mind anyway. That's like Little Red Corvette by Prince. I'm just going with it.
That one actually does have to do.
Oh, it does. That is what that is about. Yeah.
And Raspberry Beret.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, yeah, I think it actually has to do with the story Hearst would tell about his childhood bicycle.
Because I'm all for things being about vaginas.
Well, in the end, and you can take this to the bank. Aren't all of these stories, every person we've mentioned, aren't they all just about one thing? Vagina.
It's true.
And that's the beef stew, everyone.
That's the beef stew. Thank you, Blood Money. Thank you for everyone who listens. Leave your opinion of the movie down in the comments section. And hopefully we start doing these more frequently and they're not like every few months. But I'd say quality over quantity. I like all the beef stews we've done. You know,
Just like pussy.
yeah, we take time with our
Oh, yeah.
stew.
And also, tell us what else is actually just a vaginal canal and or clitoris and or all of it combined. What is the female anatomy? What's the metaphor? Not just Prince. It's not just Orson Welles. It's not just Mankiewicz. Let us know in the comments.
Because that's what we're really getting at here.
Yeah. What do you think the beef stew really means?
All right, guys.
This podcast was almost called the fish taco. With the roast beef curtains.
Well, we were talking about doing a podcast where we just talk about real estate.
And the podcast where we just talk about female reproductive organs.
Or the podcast where we talk about real estate on sitcoms and television shows and how if they could afford to live there.
If you want to hear us talk about Frasier's condo,
yeah.
smash that like
lick
button.
that like button, man. Just step on it, just rub it on.
Sensuously lick that like button. You know.
All right, man, I'll see ya.
Fondle the unsubscribe button.